what Vaughan spoke about the other day, well, same sort of era in the Bible, but it's an entire chapter. I don't want to read it because it'll take a long time, so I'm going to just step through it. It's Genesis chapter 38. This is the story, and it's in between when Joseph was kidnapped and went down to Egypt, because chapter 37 is the bit where Joseph is sold by his brothers, and then the brothers tell their father that he's been killed by a wild animal and he has the torn coat and so on. And then in chapter 39, they go back to Joseph, or Moses goes back to Joseph and Potiphar's wife and the imprisonment and so on. But in between that, they sandwich chapter 38. Now, the Bible doesn't gloss over things, you might have noticed. If it happened, it says it happened. You know, it doesn't have to go into garish detail, but it happened. And there's some things that we're sort of horrified at, but we shouldn't be, because we've got a pretty horrifying culture ourselves. We step through the story. First of all, Judah, who's one of the sons, says he went down from his brothers, away from his brothers, and turned aside to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And there Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son and called his name Now, this son then persistently refused to carry out his duty, the second son. Apparently was so evil that God just killed him, the same way he wiped out the world in the time of Noah. But then Onan was supposed to take over and marry his brother's wife to bear children and keep the line going. That's sort of shocking to us, but it happens, especially in the Far East. It used to happen a lot, we know from archaeological records. And it still happens in African tribes today. You've got to perpetuate the line. But Onan refused. And so God put him to death as well. Then Judah, having a third son, starts to get cold feet about this. So this woman's obviously one of these black widow types. So he won't give the third son. And Tamar then, the woman, takes things into her own hands, gets Judah to sleep with her, thinking her a prostitute. She becomes pregnant and bears two sons. Well, what does this got to do with us and the line of Abraham? Why is this little interlude sandwiched in here? Well, I want to look at Judah today, the story about him and how he changed, because change is a big thing in this. First of all, he's compromised. At this stage, he was probably about 15 or 16. He left the family group, hung about with Adullam the Canaanite, and instead of his father picking him a bride from within the family, as Abraham did for Isaac and Isaac did for Jacob, this Canaanite is his go-between for a Canaanite woman. And the word he turned aside to an Adullamite, and in verse 16, he turned to her. Both times, this word means in the sense of going off a path. If you've ever been hiking and gone off the path and ended up somewhere strange, you'll know what that means. So he was rebelling, not just against his father, but his family and ancestry. And he had a bad character. He's hard and callous. He plotted against Joseph and helped to deceive Jacob. Abhorrent in an Eastern culture, to deceive your father. He showed great dishonor to the family. And then he refused to follow customary law in giving Tamar to his surviving son. And she's left as a widow, shut away, no career or anything. She's just got to stay hidden away, wearing, I suppose, black. And the line of his family is imperiled because there's no offspring now. And then comes the springtime, time to shear the sheep, and it's also the breeding season. And Tamar knows he's going to go to his flock, so she ambushes him. Now, importantly, there's two words here. It says, when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enayim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. Horrifying to our nice middle-class Western sensibilities. But further on down, you see what happens. He gives her a pledge, his staff and signet, which is probably a ring where he'd sign his name rather than using paper. And when he takes the goat back as a pledge, and Adullamite asks the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was in Naim at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So there's two words for prostitute used here. One is the ordinary kind, the main road type. The other one is a cult prostitute. Prostitution was closely linked to agriculture and animal husbandry. The trouble with pagan gods is not only do they have short memories and not remember the previous year, apparently, you've also got to demonstrate to them what you want them to do. If you want your sheep to breed and your cattle to breed, you've got to show them, this is what we want the sheep to do. Hence, cult prostitutes. They're not very bright gods, actually. So Tamar dresses up as an ordinary prostitute, and Judah thinks she's a cult prostitute, sleeps with her, hoping that his sheep will breed successfully. What's he done? Well, he's turned away from the family faith in Yahweh, and he's now following the local customs and the local gods, Baal or Ashtoreth or whoever was around at that stage. He's ruthless and hypocritical as well. Your daughter-in-law has sinned and is pregnant. Bring her out and burn her. How did she get pregnant? Problem with adultery is something you can't do alone. There had to be someone else, but he didn't think it was him. As part of the family line that God promised to Abraham, that would be a blessing to the nations, Judah was compromised. He was the black sheep of the family, probably worse than all the other brothers. However, fortunately, the story doesn't end there. Great encouragement to all of us, especially to me. Where would any of us be if God just left us to wallow in our sin? I don't even like to think. I started out as a child in Durban, and I once thought, if I'd stayed in Durban, I would have been one of those surfer boys, the jawlers and everything that goes along. You have your merchant in Alice Street and so on, right? But I didn't get left there. Now, you'd think Judah is hardened in his sin. He rejected the faith of his father, mixed with the Canaanites, adopted their despicable practices. And many people do this. They become harder and harder and harder and harder until they can't change. And it looks like Judah was like that. However, just as he reaches his lowest point, ordering the burning of Tamar, who he wronged anyway, there's a change. And his conscience had been crushed underfoot until it no longer bothered him. He sold Joseph as a slave, remember? No problem. Joined in the conspiracy to deceive Jacob, no problem. Squashed when he gave himself over to the Canaanites and their loathsome religion. And was almost dead when he ordered the death of Tamar. And then when he was caught out, his conscience came to life again, and he said, she is more righteous than I. A man who cared nothing for anyone, not his father, not his family, not his great-grandfather, but by the grace of God and God's plan for Israel, his heart was changed. And in the chapters following, you see a changed Judah, as we heard the other day. He rejoins his family, forsaking the company of Adullam. Then in chapter 42, he goes down to Egypt in company with the other brothers to get food in the famine. Chapter 43, they have to go again, but this time they take Benjamin, the last surviving son of Rachel. And Judah takes responsibility for him, the brother of the same mother of Joseph, whom he sold into slavery. Chapter 44, Joseph traps them, putting his cup in Benjamin's sack of grain, using it as an excuse for arrest. And then again in chapter 44, Judah pleads with him on behalf of Benjamin and offers to take the blame, to take his place. A substitution. Judah, who lost the vision of Abraham's call that the family had, is now the one who offers himself to hold the tribe together. The one who turned away with Adullam is now the one who holds the family together. And then finally, Judah, the ancestor, Evil men tend to have evil offspring. And I actually found a little study between the offspring of Jonathan Edwards and the offspring of a notorious atheist at the same time, and how their descendants turned out, and how much the descendants of the atheist cost the state in imprisoning them, I think executing them as well, looking after illegitimate children, whereas the descendants of Jonathan Edwards, who ascended to various high offices, didn't cost the state anything at all. Who would ever think that anything good could come out of someone like Judah? If you only had Genesis chapter 38, what would you expect? This guy is a dead loss. But Judah, after Shelah, had two other children from Tamar, Perez and Zerah. And they're both mentioned throughout the Old Testament. Perez means break out or breach. And if we follow him, he's also mentioned as having descendants up to the time of Nehemiah. However, he features a few times. In Ruth chapter 4, Boaz marries Ruth to do what should have been done with Tamar, levirate marriage. And then the witnesses say, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephratah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman. Perez had a bad start, but now he's held up not just as an example, but as a blessing. May you be blessed like Perez. But further in chapter 4, Naomi takes the child, son of Ruth and Boaz, and lays him on her lap, becomes his nurse. And verse 18 says, now these are the generations of Perez, the son of Judah. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nachshon, Nachshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David, the king of Israel. And who would have thought, there's a boy born in less than ideal circumstances to a rebellious father of a Canaanite mother who was taken as a cult prostitute, would be the ancestor of King David. But it goes further than that. If you wind forward a few thousand years, we get to Matthew chapter 1, and you get the whole story of Abraham, the father of Isaac, Isaac, the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and so on, back down to David the king. And the genealogy ends this way. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Out of that bad story with Canaanite cult prostitution and rebellion and nastiness, and God having to drop someone and two people in their tracks because they were so evil, comes Jesus, a real substitutionary atonement. And in the Bible and in the lives of each one of us, there's an actual invisible hand working. They like to talk about that in economics, that there's an invisible hand that controls everything. Well, there's actually an invisible hand that controls the world. The hand of God coordinates our lives and the times we live in. You know, there's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. But God's still controlling the interesting times. We've got chaos in Europe, God's controlling it. Chaos in the Middle East, well, God's controlling it. The same hand maneuvers people and events for God's own purposes, not just for our good, but for His purposes. And He maneuvered all those things in that story for His purposes, to build a line that leads up to Jesus Christ. In the same way He changes us, He changed the heart of Judah, the heart of me, and the heart of all who follow Him. And Perez, I don't think, dreamed where his life was going to end up or how his line would end up. Did Judah, who rebelled against being part of Abraham's blessing on the nations, ever guess that the Messiah would be his descendant, the one promised in Genesis chapter 3? I don't think he did. So it's an encouragement for us, even someone in such a wretched state as Judah. And he wasn't on drugs, and he wasn't a gangster, and he wasn't, involved in state capture or anything like that. Not an alcoholic, as far as we know. But a wretched state spiritually, even if he is prosperous, which he seemed to be. You can feel the hand and the grace of God. And so no matter what the grubby details are of your life and mine, God works in them. There was a program on British TV called This Is Your Life. It was, Who Do You Think You Are? And they'd take people and then they'd trace back. And people were horrified. They'd find out their great-grandfather was a bigamist. Or their great-great-great-uncle had been a pirate or something, But we cover that over. Actually, God knows all about that. I myself am related to Michael Collins, the IRA man. Erin Gobra. But, and on my mother's side, one of our people went over to America, and so I'm related to Joseph Smith, the Mormon guy. So, you've got all these grubby details in your life, but God's sovereign purpose overrules the grubby details and the mess and the rebellion to work his will the same way he did with Judah and then Perez.